Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports, and I'm really excited for this video. And in this video, we're going to talk about the teams that I feel like are the sleeping giants in the NBA. And I think it's going to be a very surprising list because you think sleeping giant, you think, oh, this is a team that already has all their pieces put together. They're in a really good spot. And I'm looking at this more as a team that has all the puzzle pieces. They're just in the process of actually putting them all together and having them play out. And right now, I think that there's one team that's going to come out of this pack as the sleeping giants, but I think as of right now, with where we sit before the NBA draft lottery, we have a collection of teams that are very, very well positioned to become potential dynasties at some point. And I use that term very, very heavily. Dynasty is a very hard thing to beat. Look at the Golden State Warriors, the difficulties that they've had in their path to 4 championships in 8 years. I don't think that there's any guarantee that any of these teams become a dynasty, but I think that they are some of the best positioned teams in the NBA right now. Some of them by accident, some of them intentionally, and they're now in spots where we might see them take massive leaps forward. And let's jump into this video with a video preview where we look at the common themes of these teams, which we're going to specifically focus on NBA draft lottery odds. Of course, all of these teams have pretty decent odds in this year's draft to land Victor Wembanyama. We're also going to talk about cap space and how these teams are very well positioned in an event where they land Victor Wembanyama to also have money to go out in free agency spend. And guess what? You draft Victor Wembanyama, you are going to be an attractive destination for veteran players, in my opinion, with the way that he is perceived around the league. I think there's going to be a lot of interest in signing with the team that drafts Victor Wembanyama, specifically because, one, the agents understand how impactful a guy like him can be in helping their clients play big time games and get on national television. And secondly, the team that has Victor Wembanyama, I think, is going to be playing very, very deep into the postseason rather quickly in his career. You know, maybe not a conference finals team or anything like that in the first couple of years, but first, second round playoff appearances are pretty much a guarantee in my eyes as long as Wembanyama is on the court. We'll look at an established core for each team because I think the 6 teams I have listed here do have established cores, and then I'm going to specifically discuss how Wembanyama himself would fit into those teams. And to be honest, fit in maybe isn't the right word. I should use something like stand out, because Victor will stand out amongst these already established cores, which is exactly what you want him to do. And how are these guys going to fit in around him is really the big question, assuming one of these 6 teams potentially gets Victor Wembanyama. And just a quick disclaimer, we're changing OKC to no KC. We're not talking about the Oklahoma City Thunder in this video. For them, I just think that their lottery odds are too far gone at a chance for Victor Wembanyama for me to realistically include them. There's other teams that I did not include as well for specific reasons. But I think Oklahoma City, with Chet coming back next year, they're in their own ballpark when it comes to how good of a team they can become. I think most of their deficiencies that they currently have, a guy who's already on their roster, just hasn't played yet in Chet Holmgren, will cover a multitude of sins for them. So if you are a Thunder fan, you should be very excited for the future, regardless of what happens with Wembanyama. But Victor is a significantly better player than Chet Holmgren. I don't really think that's up for debate. But Oklahoma City, they're still in a very good spot long term, regardless of what happens here with Victor on draft lottery night. And then when we get into those NBA draft lottery odds, again, this is really the most important part of the video, because the assumption here is one of these 6 teams, if they were to land Victor Wembanyama, has a potential shot at growing into a potential dynasty or a team that at least has a shot at winning a championship within the next few years. And the teams that I really want to focus on, let's start with those top 3: Detroit, Houston, San Antonio. All of them have the best shot at landing Victor Wembanyama, a 14% chance, in fact, to be picking first overall. Now, this isn't your old lottery where you, if you're the worst team, had a 25% chance. I'm sure Detroit this year was wishing it was that way, but you still have to feel better than the other teams. The fact that you are at least tied for the best odds to land Victor Wembanyama, the best draft prospect to ever walk on the face of the earth. Detroit, Houston, San Antonio do have a leg up here. Then let's look at Orlando at a 9% chance. Definitely a good likelihood for them as well, just a little bit under that 10% mark to go out and get Victor Wembanyama. 1 out of 10 times they could be picking first overall in back-to-back drafts. which is very interesting. Of course, last year I drafted Paulo Banchero. We'll talk about him a little bit more later on in this video, but Orlando's very well positioned here. Indiana actually won their tiebreaker with Washington, and they move up into that very, very coveted number 7 spot in the NBA draft, where the team that's been picking 7th typically moves up rather frequently under Adam Silver. If you go back and look at recent drafts, recent draft lotteries specifically, the team that had the 7th best odds has pretty much consistently picked in the top 4. An example of that would be the Toronto Raptors. The Sacramento Kings last year as well jumped up to number 4. So Indiana, you have to feel pretty good. And then Utah as well. Of course, their odds to land Victor Wembanyama are significantly lower at 4.5% of a chance. But with the roster that they have, the amount of draft picks they have, if something were to go right for them, they have a lot of finagling that could ultimately turn this roster around. And I just couldn't include some of these other teams in here. For example, Charlotte, I just feel like there's a lot of holes already on that team. I just didn't really feel like I could include them. They very narrowly missed the cut. Portland, I think right now has a big question on their hands on what to do with Damian Lillard. And say they were to win the lottery, does Damian Lillard continue to be the point guard? I would argue yes, but that maybe mitigates what they are long term, which is why I didn't include them here. Washington, I think, has too many flaws. Dallas, I mean, if they got him and Luka, but I just don't really think that's a likelihood. Chicago, OKC, kind of in that same boat of I just don't think there's enough likelihood. Toronto, New Orleans, both of them would be insane if they got Victor Wembanyama, but I just, again, don't really think it's very likely. Charlotte's the one team on this list that maybe I should have included, but I have my reasons as to why I did not, specifically when it comes to fit. And let's look at the practical cap space this offseason. This is a very important part of the video. And for these teams, there's a variety of reasons why it matters. Let's look at Detroit first. Again, the teams on the top here, Detroit, Houston, San Antonio, they have the best odds. So I put them on the top here of this graphic. Pistons, nearly $37 million in cap space. And I think for them, a clear need on this team is good veteran players who can fill in, specifically a backup point guard who's an upgrade over Killian Hayes. I think significant shooting upgrades are necessary for Detroit, and a little bit of toughness and physicality. There's a lot of good options out there. Guy that I've loved to talk about this postseason so far as an option for a lot of different teams is Jay Crowder. He's bounced around the NBA, but everywhere he's gone, the team's been better because of him. I think he does help bring up some maturity levels, and I think Detroit, say they were to land Victor Wembanyama, Jay Crowder could go a real long way in bringing some of that mental and physical toughness to a team that really badly needs it. And they have cap space to continue to improve. Bojan Bogdanovic, also another nice player there as a veteran leader. Plus, they've got a really nice young core, which we're going to talk about. Houston, they're really the big question mark this offseason. I think the offseason could potentially run around Houston and through Houston, because at $64 million, they are absolutely juiced with cap space. And there's going to be rumblings. If Philadelphia were to lose in, say, the second round, I think that they're going to get through that series with the Brooklyn Nets at the time I'm recording this. But let's say second round, they go up and they face a team like Boston, who I think is, a safe pick to be in the second round as well, and Boston beats them convincingly. The James Harden to Houston rumors are not going to get quieter. In fact, I think they're going to get louder. And let's just say Victor Wembanyama were to land there. You add James Harden to the mix. You add some other key pieces to the mix as well. Again, with the amount of money they have, they could add theoretically nearly 2 max players. And if not 2 max players, 1 max player and 2 or 3 good role players around that, plus a mid-level exception. Houston's really in a commanding position if they were to get the first overall pick. So far in their rebuild with Rafael Stone, they've picked second with Jalen Green, third for Jabari Smith, and first overall for Victor Wembanyama would go a long way in completing that. San Antonio, $46 million, a team that, again, I think they actually have some good wings already on the roster. You look at Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, and of course Jeremy Sohan, who we're going to talk about later. All 3 of those guys, I think San Antonio's missing the man in the middle. And I said this in my Spurs offseason preview. I think that this is a very solid team, to be honest, when it comes to the role players that they have. They're really missing that 1A type player, the go-to guy that's going to open the floor and really clarify the roles of some of these other guys. Right now, I think they're stretching their players a little bit too thin and asking them to do a little bit too much. you add in a Victor Wembanyama type player, and then with cap space, you go out, maybe make a big time signing. Think back to a guy like Kyrie Irving. Back when he was first leaving Cleveland, he actually listed San Antonio as a potential team he would like to play for. Could they actually open up and become a Kyrie Irving destination? I'm not certain on that. I definitely don't have any reporting behind that. But with Wembanyama landing there, I think that would change things significantly. The Orlando Magic, $50 million. They already have their wing duo set. I think realistically, a guy like Fred VanVleet in free agency could go a long way in helping this team. But Markelle Fultz also really started to come on toward the end of the year. So do you look at a shooting guard type signing instead? Somebody who can definitely shoot the rock would be needed there in Orlando, a team that ranked bottom 5 in three-pointers attempted, bottom 10 in three-point percentage this year. They need to be able to shoot the ball better, especially if they were to move up for a guy like Victor Wembanyama on draft night. The more floor spacing, the better, and they have the money to get it done. Indiana, a little bit less money than some of these other teams, only a little bit over $28 million, but that still can go a long way in this free agency period. And I feel like out of all these teams, they maybe have the most safely established core in terms of guys who are somewhat veterans. Like Buddy Hield's a great example. I think that this team has, out of all the teams on the list, arguably the most shooting, which goes a long way in helping Victor Wembanyama. So for Indiana, it's really about addressing that kind of power forward / small forward position, just fitting in some more wings on this team that are two-way styled. Jay Crowder, another example of here of a team that would love to have him. I think Indiana would welcome Jay Crowder in with open arms. And then Utah, I think that for them, you know, every team in the league needs wings. So it might sound like I'm parroting myself a little bit, but wings are important in the NBA. There's no question about that. Utah could use another one of those in free agency. There's some decent ones out there. You know, we've talked about some of them. A guy like, you know, potentially there's a lot of good options out there. I'm going to have a free agency video at some point out on the channel as well. But my point here is these teams are all loaded with cap space and reasonable ways to get better and improve. And I think that would go a long way in bolstering a roster that would be potentially adding Victor Wembanyama on draft night. And then we look at established cores. And for Detroit, I think a lot of people are going to label Detroit as the best fit. And I understand some of the reasoning as to why, because Victor Wembanyama, I think a lot of people see him as a power forward in the NBA who also is a center. I think he fills both of those roles. Offensively, he might play a little bit of point guard where the ball is going to be in his hands a ton out on the perimeter, out on the point of attack spot on the floor right above the nail, and, you know, attacking from the top of the key. That's where Wembanyama is going to play offensively a lot. But they do have the surrounding other quote-unquote positions that fit him. You know, you have your backcourt in Cunningham and Ivy. You have your center of the future in Jalen Duren, who is one of the more switchable and versatile defensive bigs in the league with the amount of styles you can play him in defensively. You can play him at the level of the screen. You can play him in drop coverage. He's a fantastic helper. Really good rim side or help side rim protector, excuse me. And then also offensively, he's got good playmaking feel, which gives Detroit a very fun high-low option with either Wembanyama as the high man, with Duren as kind of the backside finisher, or you could even reverse that. Use Wembanyama's height at 7'4" to put some significant pressure on the rim. And then teams are asked, well, do you want to let Duren kind of get a head start at the rim and then maybe be able to lob it up to Wembanyama? Or are you just going to force Duren to try and score it himself? And I mean, he's going to be capable of that as well. So I think the middle of the floor would become a significant strength for Detroit offensively. And then defensively, they become so versatile, because I think Wembanyama is going to be able to survive out in space as well. Now, most of the time, they're going to use him in drop coverage just because he's so big and so lengthy, and there's no real reason to have to put him out at the level of the screen and make him dance out on the perimeter. But he's got the length and the mobility to probably do it. So Detroit becomes an instantly incredible, versatile team defensively. They've got the offensive pieces that you'd want. Bojan Bogdanovic becomes an awesome floor spacer for this team and playing in a very minuscule role compared to what he's capable of, which is what I think is really best for Detroit. Is if you have players who are playing in lesser roles than they should be, that means you're loaded with talent. That means you're loaded with scoring capability, and you're also able to have different ways to play, where Boyan can play out of the post every once in a while. Cade Cunningham can play in isolation or as a pick and roll big with either Wembanyama or Duren. Wembanyama can also play out of the pick and pop, which means Duren doesn't have to come off the floor for this offense to really flow and work. And then Ivy's just such a fantastic cutter and somebody who I still think, if used correctly, can be a dynamic offensive threat downhill. And then you put Wembanyama's physical presence on the court. I mean, all the attention comes off these other players, which is really going to help them excel and shine in ways that they haven't so far. Detroit, I know they only won 17 games, but they've got a really nice core, and Wembanyama added to it, I think just would really, really help this team shine and be very dangerous for this team. Then we go into our next established core, and this is the Houston Rockets here. And this one, maybe not as thrilling as that Detroit Pistons one, but I think this is one that really needs a Victor Wembanyama. You look at Jalen Green, I think some people would label it a disappointment so far in his career. I wouldn't necessarily look at it that way myself. I know he's been inefficient. I know there's a lot of, 4 for 18 shooting nights. It doesn't mean he's a bad player. I think he's just right now a young off-ball guard who's trying to find his way in the league, and he didn't have a head coach that could really help him do it in Steven Silas. Plus, the offense was very disjointed. And to be honest with you, I just don't think there was any accountability in the locker room because the coach didn't demand it. Alperen Şengün's a very talented big man. Now, I do think he has some more questions and limitations than a guy like Jalen Duren. So maybe the ceiling isn't as high defensively in Houston as it would be, say, in Detroit. But I think Victor Wembanyama's presence is that much more important than for Houston as a incredible shot blocker. And if you want to talk about upside, that's where Jabari Smith playing some real power forward minutes next to Victor Wembanyama at the center would probably become one of the more potent, deadly, both offensive and defensive combos, because not a lot of teams have the size to match up with Victor Wembanyama, obviously at 7'4". Some reports now saying 7'5". Just no teams really have the size to begin with, but you have a skilled shot maker at the power forward spot as well in Jabari Smith. I know the numbers didn't really translate this year to Houston like they did at Auburn, but I still believe in his shot. He's got sound fundamentals. His mechanics are clean. I think he can still excel. I think he just needs more structure, more stability around him from the guard position. And defensively, I mean, he's still incredible. Blocked over 50 shots as a rookie. I believe he's the first rookie ever to actually make over 100 3-pointers with 50 blocks. And there was some other caveat into that number as well that I can't remember right off the top of my head. But you add Wembanyama to this core, you have something very dangerous. And again, that $64 million in cap space. You add a James Harden, who I think is one of the best organizers in the NBA at this point. I think Doc Rivers put it best when he said he called a perfect game when it comes to kind of acting like a catcher on the floor, someone who is directing traffic and, calling the pitches, basically, if you want to use a baseball analogy. And I think the Rockets really need that. And James Harden plus Wembanyama to this core, oh my goodness. I think KPJ falls back into kind of a six-man role, which is what he should be, and that's what he'll excel at. Houston could become very, very dangerous very quickly. Then we move on to San Antonio here. And for the Spurs, this one probably you have to use a little bit more imagination with me. I know teams, people are going to look at this and there's not as much allure as a Jalen Green or a Cade Cunningham on this roster. I get it. But I do think this team is very, very decent. And when it comes to their players that they have, I know, again, they're not winning games right now. They're very young. They were definitely tanking toward the end of the season to try and stay in that top 3 so that they'd have that 14% chance of victor. They succeeded in that. And it might be really easy to write this team off as not very good right now. But they have a point guard in Trey Jones, who I trust to not turn over the ball, be an organizer for a team, which I think is going to be important for them. They have versatile defensive-minded wings who can also score the ball. Jeremy Sohan is a very solid playmaker. Think about all the things I said about Jalen Duren. I think Sohan, different player, doesn't quite knock off the rim protection element like Duren does, but I do think defensively he's somebody who can create havoc. I had the pleasure of watching him in person this year. He's very, very fun to watch. And I also think his playmaking ability, his connectivity for a team, which I think is at the epitome of Spurs basketball when they're playing their best, I think he would be very important on this roster. Next to a Victor Wembanyama, Keldon Johnson, and Devin Vassell, who's not pictured on the screen. Vassell is not, but Vassell took a big step forward. I loved him out of Florida State. He's a pure scorer. He's somebody who I think was a pro scorer coming out of college, and I think he really started to showcase that this year. Plus, Keldon Johnson, you have those physical wings, those lengthy players, and I think Wembanyama now with the absence of Jakob Poeltl would be the connecting piece, the finishing piece. And the reason why the Spurs were so poor this year is because you're asking a level 2 or level 3 player to try and be your go-to guy. And realistically, Wembanyama steps in. He's the level 1, the top tier, top-notch player that takes all of that offensive responsibility and also adds a huge dynamic to their defense of shot blocking, rim protection, and just some wow factor to a team that really badly needs it. And it kind of reshuffles the deck and puts everyone back to where they're supposed to be. You look at Dallas. I think Dallas last year specifically, when they made a run to the conference finals, is a great example of what I'm talking about. Luka Doncic is that 1A, that top-notch guy. Now, I know the Mavs missed the playoffs this year, not a great example, but they got worse with Kyrie Irving, so maybe this is a perfect example where after that, the roles were very clear. Jalen Brunson's that 2 player. Obviously, he's had a great year in New York. It's very nice to have a very good 2. I think Keldon Johnson and Devin Vassell, maybe not quite to that level, but I think together they can kind of fill that. And then from there, Spencer Dinwiddie was kind of that tertiary scorer. Dorian Finney-Smith, we know what role he was going to play in. And just roles were defined and clear, and I think San Antonio would be benefited by that as well. Once adding that top-notch guy, and Victor Wembanyama, to me, is that player. Then Orlando, we look at them, and obviously they've got those 2 big wings as well. That's been something I've said multiple times in this video, and that's because it's very, very important in today's NBA to have apex-type wings who are big, physical, switchable. Oh, and by the way, they're very skilled offensively. Both Paulo, who scored about 20 points a game his rookie season, very nice season for him, likely going to win Rookie of the Year from my understanding. And then also Franz Wagner in his second year took another big step forward. We saw him in the World Cup as well for Germany last summer, and we knew that big step forward was coming, and he cemented it as well with a very nice season for Orlando. And then Markelle Fultz coming back from injury and stepping back into a role where playing with the ball in his hands showcase some of that playmaking flexibility. Also, I need to mention, because I forgot to mention it during my Orlando Magic offseason preview, the catch and shoot shot is looking quite a bit better from Markelle Fultz, a little bit less janky, a little bit more natural again, which was a much needed adjustment that, you know, he struggled with when he first got to the NBA after dealing with that shoulder injury and issues that he had in Philadelphia. I think Markelle Fultz is starting to blossom into the player that a lot of people hoped he could become. I mean, he caught some incredible lobs this year as well, where you just think, oh my gosh, that's our point guard going up and catching the ball. They do have the money to go out and make a move for a point guard like a Fred VanVleet. But again, if they don't want to go that way based on how Fultz played, I wouldn't blame them. I think you maybe look at some shooting, try and find guys who can actually put the ball in the hoop out from behind the three-point line. And that's something that would really provide a lot of spacing, gravity to this team. And then, you know, with Wendell Carter Jr. and Bol, I haven't even mentioned some of the other key pieces. This Orlando team is deep when it comes to key young players. Imagine a lineup with Bol and Victor Wembanyama on the floor. I know, you know, Magic fans got mad at me a little bit because I was hyping up Bol a little bit. I know he has his issues, but a guy like Victor Wembanyama and him on the floor, I just think that length becomes so deterring around the rim and so dynamic and unique out on the perimeter defensively as well, that teams just would not really know how to react to that, which would be very, very fun to watch. So if you're a Magic fan, I know you're already cheering for Wembanyama to land in Orlando, but secretly I myself would be very interested in just watching Bol and Wembanyama on the same team, just from kind of an entertainment standpoint more than anything. But the basketball sense works here as well for Orlando. You have these hybrid wings. You give them a serious dominant big man who can really protect the rim. I know Wendell Carter Jr. I think does a very good job protecting the rim, kind of underrated in that regard because he doesn't get the blocks per game, but he more so challenges vertically and forces some tough attempts. Now, I still think that, you know, dynamic of a shot blocker does go a long way in kind of instilling some fear in the hearts of your opponents. And now here we move to Indiana. And I think their core is another really great example of a very, very clear fit onto how Victor Wembanyama could really help this team. Kind of like a more mature, a little bit more proven Detroit Pistons here is what I see in Indiana, where Miles Turner, an excellent shot blocker, has been for quite some time. We also know he's capable of stepping out behind the three-point line, knocking it down. Seems like once a year he has like a 50-point game that just comes out of nowhere. But really, this whole thing hinges on Tyrese Halliburton, who is becoming a bigger point guard. I think he has a very, very similar capability and ability to what we saw from Chris Paul as a very high assist type player, very low turnover guy, really controls the game and is a very, very good player to have. Of course, that's not rocket science there that Tyrese Halliburton's a good player to have, but he's a good player to have running your team and a good player to have at point guard. And when your team needs to get touches to a Victor Wembanyama, he'll make sure it happens. But he's also got the skill set to be your number 2 scorer in the case that Victor Wembanyama is there. Plus Benedict Mathurin, we've already seen how electric and how dynamic he can be, specifically as a slasher. I think the shot making is going to come along as well. That's something he flashed quite a bit at Arizona. I knew year one his efficiencies weren't going to be great. They kind of finished around where I was expecting them a little bit, but I do think as a slasher downhill threat, you need another guy who has that I'm him mentality on your roster. We saw how important Austin Reeves was for the Lakers in the game 1 against the Grizzlies, where he just said, yeah, I know I have LeBron and Anthony Davis on my team. I don't really care. I'm going to go get buckets when I need to. Mathurin has that mentality to him where he doesn't really care who else is on the floor. Plus, you add in Buddy Hield's three-point shooting. I think really Wembanyama is the missing link here for Indiana, from going from a team that hasn't made the playoffs for a couple of years to all of a sudden, oh my goodness, watch out for this team. Pacers fans, I kind of hope it happens just so I can see him run with this lineup, because it'd be very, very fun. And then we look at the Utah Jazz, again, a team that doesn't have as great of odds at landing Victor Wembanyama, but I think they're one of the more fascinating landing spots because they have so many draft picks over the next few years. And then you also consider the fact that it seems like they do already have their front court of the future in Lauri Markkanen, who is, in my opinion, the most improved player of the year of the NBA this year. Definitely showed out in a way that I don't think anyone was expecting. And then Walker Kessler, or should I say Blocker Kessler, pretty much lived up to everything I wrote about him on my own scouting report before last draft, where I said this guy's going to be a very, very good shot blocker. My comparison for him last year was Brook Lopez, and I'm hoping he can really take that step forward as a three-point shooter. And no, I'm not talking about Brooklyn Nets Brook Lopez. I'm talking about Milwaukee Bucks Brook Lopez. And I think, you know, he showcased as a drop cover big what he's capable of. I think Utah would really, really destroy teams with their length and size and just overall shot blocking capabilities if you add a guy like Victor Wembanyama into this core. There are some questions about what the backcourt's going to look like long term, but we saw Utah was very competitive this year. I think Will Hardy is the coach of the future for that team. It was an excellent hire by Danny Ainge. And I think Utah is very, very well positioned long term, even if they don't get Victor. But if they do, oh my goodness, their whole rebuild's accelerated. The team's ready to win as early as next year. And I think that going forward, they'd become a real threat in the Western Conference year in, year out, which gets me very excited. Remember, this is like a puzzle piece where Wembanyama could fit in and really be that final missing piece. Now, he's the biggest puzzle piece of the entire puzzle for whatever team gets him, because he's the guy, you put him right at the center and you figure out everything around him and what puzzle pieces fit onto him. But these teams that I mentioned already have those pieces in place. This is part of why I didn't mention Charlotte in this video. This is part of why I didn't mention Portland, because I think that their timelines or their players that they currently have don't fit as clearly as what these 6 teams do in this video, which I'm very excited to see where Wembanyama ultimately lands. We'll know as soon as NBA Draft Lottery Night is over, which I'm very excited about. Make sure you comment your preferred fit down below. Now, I know most of you are just going to say your favorite team, but I want to know what your favorite team is as well. So let me know down in the comment section what your favorite team is or what your preferred fit is down below, irregardless of favorite team. Perhaps, you know, maybe your team's not in the lottery race right now, so you don't have a shot at Wembanyama. I understand. Let me know though down in the comment section below where you want to see him playing basketball next season. I'm very, very excited for this NBA draft. If you want to see an NBA mock draft, make sure to go check one out on the channel as well. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Really hope you enjoyed. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and we'll catch you in the very next utility sports video.